Hello knitters, Barbara Benson here. I'm an independent knitwear designer who also likes to make videos here on my YouTube channel, Watch Barbara Knit. Make sure to check in the description below where you will find information on anything that I talk about during this video, including where to find my patterns should you want to knit one for yourself, how to join the Watch Barbara Knit Facebook group, and how to support me on Patreon. Today, I want to talk about knitting skill levels. So this came up because there's a very common question that I get in the comments and on patterns, and it is this pattern suitable for beginners? And the difficulty with that question is, what do you consider a beginner? And that all goes into, what is your skill level in knitting? You honestly self-evaluating what your skill level is. Because if there's one thing I've found, it is that knitters, they're kind of fuzzy on it. A large percentage of knitters that I've run into consistently underestimate their skill levels, and then there are the occasional incredibly confident knitters who sort of overestimate their skill level. But really having a good understanding of where you fall as where skill level goes will really help you in evaluating patterns and deciding whether or not it's something you want to tackle, and in also evaluating patterns if you want to advance your skills, what kind of patterns to look at that will help you along the path to take you up level by level and improve your knitting skill. So the Craft Yarn Council has tried to standardize things. It's sort of like the whole herding cats concept. There's no one making the rules. There's no knitting police. The Craft Yarn Council has established a set of rules, which we're going to go over, guidelines, but it is still very subjective. And then each independent magazine has their own scale. So if you're looking at a pattern in a magazine or on a website, like Knitty has their own scale, it's good to look at their scales. But I wanted to first touch on the Craft Yarn Council scales and definitions. And I typed them up, and I'm going to have them on screen here for y'all. And we're going to start now, beginner. And I have it written over here, so if you see me looking over here, I'm just trying to make sure. So if you say you're a beginner, or if a pattern is rated a beginner level pattern, it's really very much for first-time knitters, people who are just learning how to knit. The only stitches that are really going to be involved in the pattern are knit and purl, maybe a slip stitch. Nothing fancy, nothing intricate, no kind of like really elaborate patterns, even if it's just knit and purl. And there may be a little bit of shaping involved, but not a lot. More likely not, it will only be like knit two togethers involved. Maybe a slip knit, but very simple, very beginner. And here's the thing. Beginner, some knitters, once they learn how to knit and purl, they're like off like a shot. They don't stay in the beginner area very long. They're not sitting in the kiddie pool for any length of time. They just want to dive right into the deep end. So beginner is, and again, we're referring to skill level, not time in grade, I guess I could say, because I have met knitters who have maybe been knitting for 20 years, but never progressed past beginning skill levels. If garter stitch makes you happy and you don't want to do any shaping and you just are happy making garter stitch shawls or scarves with minimal shaping and nothing going on, you may not have advanced past beginner, and there's nothing wrong with that. Knitting is all about doing what makes us happy and making what makes us happy. So when I say beginner, it's not just referring to you are at the beginning of your journey. It's a skill set. beginning skill set. So knit, purl, maybe an increase or decrease, maybe a slip stitch. And that's it. So if you ask me, is this pattern suitable for a beginner? Of my patterns falling into the beginner category, I've got maybe one pattern that falls into the beginner category. But the thing is, I think most knitters who consider this themselves to have the beginner skill level have really moved up to the next level, which is easy. Craft Yarn Council says easy patterns. Okay. Now, easy patterns, it involves basic stitches. Knit, purl, maybe get a knit two together, maybe get a slip, slip, knit, definitely get a slip stitch in there. You're going to be looking at repetitive stitch patterns like knit two, purl one, knit two, purl one, knit two, purl one. Things that have rhythm to them and that are fairly simple and straightforward. In an easy pattern, you're going to be seeing stripes, which is basic color changes. You're just going to be changing mostly at the beginning of a row, every other row, to create your stripes. Usually, you're only going to be looking at two colors. I, personally, this is not Craft Yarn Council, I snuck it in, with simple color changes and repetitive stitch patterns, your basic mosaic style color work fits into the easy category, because really the only things you're doing are knit and purl, slipping stitches, and changing colors at the beginning of rows. So every other row. So it fits into the easy category when we're just doing basic mosaic color work. It's easy. Is it beginner? No. It is not beginner because we have color changes. It still might just be knit, purl, slip, but changing the colors takes it out of beginner and into easy. Simple shaping can happen here, which is why you get into like a top-down triangle being in the easy category, and some crescent shawls will be in the easy category because you're just doing very simple and usually repetitive shaping. And, you can really get into sweaters that fall into the easy category if they have very simple finishing, which is the last thing on this list. So really, if it's mostly a sweater that's mostly knit in the tube, it's got simple raglan shaping, and there really isn't much to do, you're not sewing it up, there's not a whole lot of finishing to do, you can get sweaters that fall into the easy category. You can get almost every type of garment falling into the easy category. The example I used about just a simple tube may or may not fall into easy, because as you'll see when we get to the next level, they don't necessarily include knitting in the round in the easy category. I personally think knitting in the round does fall into the easy category. In some ways, knitting in the round is, I find, easier than knitting flat, because if you're knitting a sweater flat and you then have to seam the pieces together, I don't know that that falls into simple finishing. If you're knitting a sweater in the round and there's no seaming, that makes the finishing much, much easier, but you've added in the complexity of knitting in the round. So as I said, it's subjective and there's wiggle room here. But I would put simple mosaics under easy. And here you can see the beginner category is so very, very narrow. I would call it more novice. It's newbie. It's your very first project. Now, I'm going to go to intermediate. Intermediate, and there seems to be quite a jump between what the Craft Yarn Council considers easy and intermediate. When you get into intermediate, you're getting into basic lace patterns, basic cable patterns, what they call simple intarsia, which is just going to be like little color blocks. And I would put your more complex mosaic color work in the intermediate category. They don't discuss mosaic, but again, you're still knitting stripes and slipping stitches, so it's still simple color changes, it's still simple stitches involved, but the pattern itself might be more intricate. So I would put your complex mosaic color works into the intermediate category. And they also start breaking out what kind of techniques. And as I said, you'll see using double pointed needles is considered an intermediate technique. Knitting in the round is considered an intermediate technique. And frankly, that is one, as I said, I I might quibble with, because I think knitting in the round really belongs in the easy category, as long as you're knitting on circular needles, because it is so easy to knit on circular needles. Double pointed needles, yes, intermediate. Circular needles, it's very easy. So again, subjective. And then middle level shaping and mid-level finishing. So you're looking at stuff that's a little more complicated, but not getting into like very complex or very elaborate or very innovative. There are innovative things that kind of fall into the intermediate category. It depends on the creativity of the designer and how they have worked it into things. So that's intermediate. And then the next level is what they call experienced knitter. And again, this is where I run into quibbles with their terminology, because as I said, with beginner, you think I'm at the beginning. Experienced, implying that you've had experience. You can have experience of knitting for 20 years, but if the only thing you've knit is a garter stitch scarf, you don't fall into the experienced knitting skill level. See how it gets confusing? So, but experience, you're looking at the top end of stuff. Complex lace, complex cables, intricate intarsia. I don't understand the Craft Yarns Council's like focus on intarsia, but whatever. Fair Isle knitting, which is you're getting into stranded knitting. So they're saying stranded does not come into play until you're an experienced category. Numerous color changes, working with a bunch of stuff. Techniques include short rows. And again, I think that this categorization might be a little dated, because I think the popularity of short rows has definitely shifted it down in skill level, perception of skill level. You see short row techniques popping up in simpler patterns that are aimed at lower skill levels. So I don't know. Detailed shaping and refined finishing. So those are the categories as defined by the Craft Yarn Council. What I want you to encourage yourself to do is think about where you might fall on this category. I have had knitters come into the yarn store I work at, and they're like, I'm a beginning knitter and I need you to help me find a pattern, an easy pattern. I'm a beginner. And they say this repeatedly, I'm a beginner. I'm not very good. I don't do this very well. And then I start delving and we start looking at patterns, and I'll be looking through patterns and they'll be looking at them with me and they'll be, oh, that, I like that. I'm like, well, that has lace in it. You said you were a beginner. I would not. Oh, well, I've done some lace. If you've done lace, you're not a beginner. Okay? If you've done lace, if you've done cables, if you've done short rows, you're not a beginning knitter. You don't fall into the beginning skill level. Give yourself some credit and understand that you are better than you think you are. You have a higher skill level than you think you do. So often, knitters depreciate their own skills, and they kind of poo-poo it. On Ravelry, there's a little thing where you can rank the difficulty of a pattern. And there's like almost no patterns. If you search by difficulty, almost no patterns show up at the top end of difficulty. And I've been involved in a lot of discussions with other knitters and other designers about that and why this is the case. And for so many knitters, the idea of, well, if I was able to complete this, then it can't have been that difficult because I'm not that great of knitter. But you are. If you are doing these things, you are a great knitter, and you should pat yourself on the back and understand that you have tackled things that are way above what you thought was your pay grade. Okay? And it's discounting. So if you've done something with short rows, and there's all kinds of short rows now. There's short row hat, there's short rows and scarves. People are just doing short rows all of the time. Brioche, okay? Brioche. If you have done any brioche, you are solidly in the intermediate skill category, okay? You're not a beginner. You're not even in easy, Okay, now some brioche is easy, but it's intricate and it involves multiple steps and it frequently involves multiple colors. So you're not in. You're not in beginner anymore. So when people ask me, is this pattern appropriate for beginners? I feel like it depends on what kind of beginner you are. Are you an adventurous beginner? And if you're an adventurous beginner, if you are a fearless knitter, that really opens up, it makes these skill levels almost irrelevant. Just because you haven't done a thing, are you scared of it? Do you think you can't do it? Or are you like, hey, it's only yarn and needles, we can give it a try. I can find a tutorial on YouTube. I can ask one of my friends how to do this thing. Now, definitely, if you are brand new, if you just learned how to cast on, and all you know how to do is knit, and you struggle with purl, yes, you need beginner patterns. You need patterns that are going to advance your skill set if that's what you want to do. If you're perfectly happy with just knitting garter most of the time, good on you. But asking me if this is a good pattern for a beginner, it's a challenge, because based on the definition of a beginner pattern, if it has increases and decreases in it, no. If it has yarn overs and knit two togethers in it, if it has a little bit of lace in it, no. If you look at a piece and you visually see lace, then no, it is not going to fall into the beginner category. So, but it could be what I consider an easy pattern. I try very hard to write patterns that look like they're more difficult to knit than they actually are to knit. So if you're watching this and you are really and truly at the beginner level and you want to knit a beginner pattern, probably your best bet for me personally, for my patterns, it would be a good scarf. A good scarf is probably one of the only patterns I have that falls into that beginner category. It has knits, it has purls, and it has slipped stitches. And that's all it has. Most anything else, you're getting into yarn overs for increases and decreases, and then on up in skill level. Now, that said, if you're an adventurous beginner, the sky is really the limit. Most of actually probably all, I have 3 or 4 free videos that show you step by step how to knit shawls. And you get to watch me do it with my hands. And if you are comfortable with watching me do it and trying to replicate it yourself, then you should be able to do those patterns. It is what it is. So I made this video because if you just ask me, is this a beginner pattern? I don't have an answer for you. I don't have an easy answer for you. But I wanted to go over the Craft Yarn Council standards. So if you see something that's labeled beginner, easy, intermediate, or experienced, to give you context on where you personally might fall, and maybe to give you a look at a little list of things you might want to add to your repertoire to move up. So what I would love, if you have gotten this far in this video, is I would love for you to honestly take stock of the patterns you have knit and the processes that you have done. Have you knit lace? Have you knit cables? Have you done Fair Isle? Have you done short rows? Have you done brioche? I would like you to honestly think about what you have done, and with throwing humbleness and humility and taking all that and just throwing it over your shoulder and ignoring it, seriously and honestly evaluate what skill level you think you are at. And when you have figured out honestly where you think you are, put it in the comments below and yell out loud and proud. If you seriously look at this, I want you to tell me at the beginning of this video where you thought you probably were, and at the end of this video where you now know you are. Say, I'm an experienced knitter. Say, I'm an intermediate knitter. Say, I thought I was a beginner, but I'm actually in the easy category, or maybe up into intermediate. Let me know, because I really want to know if my guesses on how many people underestimate themselves, how many knitters underestimate themselves. I want to know if I was right. And you know what? If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But I have a sneaky feeling that a lot of y'all might be at a little bit higher level than you thought you were. So, if you like this video, please give it the thumbs up, click that like button. And if you would like to be notified whenever I upload a new video, please subscribe to my channel and select notifications. Thank you so much.